I believe there is a state portion to that funding, but I'm not entirely sure. So let me get back to you.
Okay, and just sorry, thank you. I appreciate that. And one last follow-up on that is there's also several thousand individuals with HIV who live upstate, and so I would look to have conversations with you offline about dealing with that population in a similar manner to HASA. But that's it for me. Just let me end with this. Thank you to you, and thank you to the governor. He did an outstanding job with his social services budget this year, and it's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. I do have some questions, and one of them is that although the executive budget assumes continued declines in overall public assistance caseload through fiscal year 2017, the budget proposed has a $40 million increase in appropriation authority for the Safety Net Assistance Program, an increase of 9%. To what can this increase be attributed?
I think it's similar to what we discussed just a few minutes ago, which is the projection of where the caseload, what the caseload's needs are going to be for this coming year. At any given month, the caseload can go up or down, and based on the solid projections that we have in hand and that has been executed by the Division of the Budget, we believe that those funds are necessary to support those programs and those clients.
So thank you for that. But then what you're saying is you see the trend going up, actually. So what steps is the agency taking? What steps are being taken by the agency to address the trend?
Mm-hmm. As you know, the agency operates numerous work support programs as well as work training programs in order to help people get back into the work environment in order to reduce the caseloads. And we work closely with our not-for-profit providers as well as the local districts on some of those programs. So the more that we can focus on work and participation and finding people work activities, I think the better off we are in the state of New York. So I think it's all about getting people back to work.
I'm very familiar with the work participation programs, and I know Assemblyman Goodell has done a lot of work in this area. As you look around the counties, however, there are counties across the state that have very low work participation rates. And what is the agency doing to assist those counties to get those numbers up?
The agency works closely with all of the districts, and so I'm not sure exactly what district you're talking about, but if we can, look at it offline and talk about maybe some of the initiatives in an individual county, and if you have a concern about a specific individual county, we should look at it and we can talk about what programs we have right now and what we may be able to do additionally to bring them up.
That would be great. I know that Cattaraugus County, for example, which I represent, has done an excellent job in the work participation program. So if there are best practices, maybe we can spread those across the state with your help.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask about the fair hearing chargebacks. So in the fiscal year 2015 enacted budget, there was included a performance improvement initiative to encourage local service districts with high percentages of the statewide total of fair hearings to improve their administrative fair hearing practices. Have any local social service districts had penalties assessed against them in accordance with this initiative? And if so, which ones?
No local services districts have received any penalties or chargebacks as a result of this particular legislation. In fact, we have seen a decline in the number of unscheduled hearings continually because of the agencies working with the local districts. We've instituted several improvements. We've done the lean process in collaboration with New York City and HRA in order to come up with improvements, and I think it's been wildly successful, and I don't think the chargeback at this point is needed.
So I'm glad to hear that there have been improvements. That's great news. And I was wondering, though, because this initiative actually is set to expire on March 31st of 2016, so in very short order. And obviously there were underlying issues that prompted this whole effort to begin with. What are your thoughts on what happens after March 31st of this year? Do you see that there could be a return to some of the issues that previously existed, and how will we address that?
I hope not, and I think not. I think we've worked collaboratively with the districts over the last 2 years in order to revamp and really tighten the process as tightly as we can, and I think that's what has led to the success in the reduction in the backlog of cases. So, no, I hope we won't return here, and I have confidence that we won't.
Thank you. I salute the governor for his attention to the homelessness problem, and as we've seen in New York City, there's an exploding issue with increased numbers that are so significant, and as Assemblyman Hevesy pointed out, however, there is a homeless problem upstate. So you touched on the 6,000 new units and the fact, and I appreciate, Commissioner Rubin, that you're here today too. You touched on the 1,000 new units, I believe, of supportive housing that are available out there. One of the questions I had, however, is that there are these 1,000 units, but the agency's budget in this area is essentially flat. So will your agency have any involvement in carrying out this proposal? And is there any additional information that you can provide? Because obviously there's a deep concern, there's a need, yet it doesn't seem like the funding is there through your agency. So how will that work?
I think those, the funding mechanism for those shelter beds would be the same as all of our other shelter beds. I mean, there is shelter costs which are paid through public assistance, and there are funding formulas and reimbursement rates that exist within these funding formulas. And I think that the funding will come from the existing funds that we use right now.
Okay, but we anticipate, however, that there's probably going to be an increase just because of the increased population. So just want to maybe have further discussions about that issue. Because
Will do.
Also brought up previously was the Empire State Poverty Reduction Initiative, and I wanted to ask about that because the city of Jamestown, which I represent, is one of the 10 cities selected to be part of the governor's $25 million Empire State Poverty Reduction Initiative. And as you pointed out, there are $500,000 planning grants that will be distributed to each of these cities, with the remaining $20 million to leverage private sector and foundation funding for initiatives designed to reduce poverty, and to also increase social mobility. So your agency is going to be involved in overseeing this initiative, correct?
Yes.
You'll be monitoring that? And
yes.
Do you have any further information about how the grants will be distributed? And I was wondering, is it for capital expenses? Is it for operating? And you mentioned that it could be working with not-for-profits, for-profits, but it just seems like it's a little bit undefined right now. So can you give some more structure and definition to what this actually will mean?
I think the intent here is to make it flexible. I think each one of these communities that have been selected have their own unique poverty issues, and so the $20 million has been set aside. I think it can be used for capital construction as well as for implementation of new programs that could help resolve some of those local issues. And so I think the flexibility with regards to the $20 million is, I think, is what's going to help these communities in order to address their needs.
What metrics will you use to measure success of the program? So, you know, the ultimate goal, I think, from what you said, is just this broad vision of reducing poverty, which we all support, obviously, and we need to do something about it. But how will you measure the success of the program?
I think that's going to be part of the planning process as these communities take their $500,000 and start to implement and launch their planning efforts. I think that needs to be an important component of what they're thinking about as they are developing those plans. I think those plans will be their roadmap to success in those areas, and so measuring the success becomes important as we look to expand that possibly in future years, or other communities are looking to mimic what has been done successfully in these, counties in these cities that have been selected.
So there are several agencies that already exist in Chautauqua County that deal with poverty issues. So, for example, Chautauqua Opportunities Incorporated, and it's everything from that agency to a lot of United Way agencies to Salvation Army, whatever. Is there a way to is part of that mobilizing those organizations? They do a good job already of working together, but how will you tap into all of that experience and knowledge that exists currently in those agencies?
I think the Rochester Anti-Poverty Task Force is a good example, and I think this is modeled after that. I think the expectation is fully that you need a wide array. You need to call in and have those community-based organizations, as well as United Way and others who have been successful in helping some of the communities think this through. So absolutely, I think it's a part of the recipe for how those planning efforts are supposed to occur.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Next, Assemblyman Goodell.
Thank you very much for being here today. As you know, the federal government has changed the SNAP program and reinstated a work requirement for able-bodied individuals who are receiving SNAP. While I appreciate the governor's initiative to increase SNAP eligibility from 130 to 150% of federal poverty, that's a meaningless gesture unless the individuals who are in that program can meet qualifying work experience requirements. Does your budget include any funding or other initiatives to help individuals who are able-bodied receiving SNAP benefits meet that work experience requirement?
So I understand that the ABOD requirement, that is a federally mandated requirement, is currently upon us right now. We are, at this point in the stage, working very closely with the districts to ensure that they have what they need. As you know, SNAP determinations are made on an individual basis, and so as individuals come in, the counties will be working very closely with them to ensure that they can get back into compliance with their work requirements. There's a number of different tools that the counties have that they can use in order to make this happen.
As Senator Young mentioned, you know, the existing work participation rates vary amongst counties. Statewide, we're not meeting what was the federal target of 50%. I think we're around the 30% range. This requirement is on top of existing ones. So my question again is there any additional funding in this budget to assist local social services districts meeting the increased work participation and obligations that are the result of SNAP amendments? Is there any change in this budget to address that?
There isn't an increase in funding for the work participation programs, but they still exist. And I think to the greatest extent that the counties can continue those efforts and, you know, target those efforts to these SNAP participants, I think, you know, they will have a greater success of being able to comply. So there's no new funding.
Looking at some of your programs, I noted that all the funding, 100% of the funding for the Welfare to Careers program, the Advanced Technology Training Program, Career Pathways Program, the Wage Subsidy Program, Wheels for Work Program, all those funding opportunities were eliminated in this budget. With a greater employment obligation, shouldn't we be increasing funding for those types of programs rather than eliminating the funding?
Absolutely. I understand your question. And so I think we all know that the executive budget is constructed in a way that it covers our core programs, and then the additional initiatives are negotiated through the process. And so, you know, as we've said and we've talked about in the past, if those funding programs are enacted, we will happily administer them.
A very diplomatic way of encouraging us to restore funding. And I appreciate that. Looking at child care, I appreciate the governor has increased the child care allotment by $100,000 on the child care subsidies. But at the same time, he's cut $5.7 million from the child care demonstration projects and eliminated child care subsidies for SUNY and for CUNY. So it looks like we're going backwards on child care by about $6 million. Is that your understanding of the budget as well?
You know what? I think that question was asked earlier, and I really need to check on the components, the various components of the program to see what was eliminated and what is still there. So I really need to double check on that.
Okay, and I look forward to your response.
Okay.
One of the greatest frustrations I have is that when we're encouraging people to leave welfare and become self-sufficient with a higher lifestyle and a better lifestyle and whatnot, they run into financial barriers. You know, they reach 130%, they lose their food stamps. They reach 175%, they're ineligible for HEAP. They go over 138%, they're ineligible for Medicaid, they get a subsidy up to 200%, and then they're on their own. Every time they hit a financial barrier like that, they lose money, out-of-pocket benefits, net, when they take a raise or when they accept additional employment. What are we doing in the state to make it possible, more feasible, for people to actually be successful and move ahead?
I recognize the challenge. However, the agency is doing a lot in this area. Public assistance, as you know, is meant to be temporary in nature. However, when a family does reach the threshold, or an individual does reach the threshold, and they become ineligible for assistance, there are several different work supports that the agency has in place in order to help transition them off of public assistance and into self-sufficiency. And one of those is, you know, being eligible for child care for up to a year after you are off of public assistance. I think the other sort of programs that we have, and we've talked about, is the SNAP program. There are also programs to maintain a person's eligibility for health insurance, as well as energy assistance assistance, as well as numerous tax credits that are available for low-income families. And I think when you couple all of those together, it provides a nice safety net and nice assistance to help somebody transition off of public assistance.
Thank you. I will advise you that I did couple them all together, create a graph that shows the impact on employment versus loss of benefits. And shockingly, in many situations, you are much better off in New York State by declining a raise, and I'll be happy to share that with you. And thank you again for your comments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm going to take the next set of questions. Just quickly on the poverty initiative. So Rochester already got, I think, $550,000 last year, as they were, I guess, the pilot for this idea. So what have they proposed? What have they come in recommending for themselves? And do they get in line with the other 9 locations? How does that work? I mean, they were a year ahead of the rest of us, so to speak. So what happens for Rochester now, and what are they asking for?
I do not know all of the specifics of the Rochester proposal. However, I do understand that the task force has done a lot of work to identify what their needs are and where they're going. I think that they are going to need additional funding. I do not know what the plan is for them at this moment going forward, but I do know that they'll need to continue their efforts.
And the $20 million that they'll be, the 10 locations will be competing for, that's capital money. Am I reading the budget correctly?
It's capital money, yes.
Okay, so you're giving planning money, and then for the communities to come back with saying what they would do with capital money to address their poverty concerns.
Yes.
Is the department giving any suggestions on what you would build that would help with poverty issues?
I think what the state will do, not just OTDA, but other agencies who can lend a hand as well, will definitely be available for the planning committee and the team, as we were for Rochester Anti-Poverty Task Force. And I think the expertise that we did lend to them helped to shape a really successful planning effort and a proposal that they can now move forward with. So yes, we plan on assisting and providing guidance where necessary.
Okay. Like my colleagues, I would like to point out that overall, I think many of us are very happy with the social services and OTDA budget this year. I would like to point out, as you did in your testimony, how pleased I am that the state is moving forward to expand eligibility for federal SNAP benefits. I am known to be somewhat critical of the state's economic development programs, but for the record, expanding SNAP to people who are eligible is 100% federal money, immediately gets spent in poor communities in their local stores, has a multiplier effect in the local economy for jobs, from the local store, through the trucking to the store, through the fields where food is grown. So actually, for those of you who follow regional economic development, you might point out that expanding food stamps probably has a better return on it than almost any other program the state might invest in, and it's all federal money. So I applaud the governor and your department for moving forward with that change. And anything more we can do to expand participation of eligible New Yorkers in food stamps, SNAP, I'm never going to learn the new name, would actually play off the last Assembly member's point of how do we support families who are working but still earning too little or moving in and out of the workforce. So I do applaud you on that. I don't know whether the next question is for you or the Housing Commissioner, but around funding for homelessness issues. So last year's budget, we said we were putting $74.5 million of J.P. Morgan bank settlement money into programs to address homelessness, and we were moving $55 million in a savings from the changes in the youth programs, youth at home programs. We were going to move that into services for the homeless. My understanding is none of that has been spent, and we're getting close to the end of the fiscal year. Can somebody let me know what happened with those monies?
Sure. Senator, thank you for your question. With respect to the $75 million of the J.P. Morgan money, this predates my arrival at the agency, but it was actually in our budget and held there, I think, for sub-allocation to whatever agency, subject to the spending plan, to whatever agency ultimately it was used for. It's actually now part of the governor's commitment to the support services for the new 6,000 units. So that's included within, I think it's our total of, I want to say it's almost $200 million for this, I may be wrong, but almost $200 million total for support, for contracts supporting those 6,000 units that we're ultimately going to roll out. The 75 is the first chunk of that. The 55, and this is now truly not in my, not only does it predate my getting here, but I think it might actually not be part of my agency, but I think that 55 is in support of, has gone in support of some of the rental assistance programs that are run in New York City, but I might be not right, otherwise known as wrong about that.
My understanding was that was what that money was intended for.
Okay.
But as of today, I've been advised that we haven't spent that money. So that was my question to you, and I'd be happy if you could get back to me on that.
One of us will absolutely do that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And going back to the J.P. Morgan settlement money, it does sort of move me down the road of the overall commitments on homelessness funds in this year's budget. It worries me, I will tell you, that we are applying funds that we promised last year before we ever had this new commitment, that we didn't spend them, but we'll spend them towards that longer-term commitment. I think we all want to see us moving forward. I don't think there's any debate. We want to see more funds out there, both for more supportive housing units throughout the state of New York, and more affordable housing, which was another hearing you were at recently throughout the state of New York. But it troubles me when we commit in previous years' budgets to things and then we don't spend them, but then we count them as going forward as if they weren't previous commitments. And meanwhile, the numbers of people desperately waiting in line to get off the streets just keeps growing. So from my perspective, I don't think last year's monies ought to count towards future years' accounting. It was supposed to get out there in the fiscal year that's ending, and I'd be surprised if there wasn't a mechanism where those providers could use that money now. But on that note, even in going forward with the governor's proposals, and I guess this will jump back to the OTDA side of the room, but maybe not. money for homeless services is written in a way in the budget that one's led to believe it's coming out of the safety net budget and will somehow be, at least as a formula, simply paid for by the city of New York. And so I'm a little confused what we're doing there, because right now, unlike the rest of the state, the city of New York is only receiving about 20% of its costs towards its homeless system from the state, and it appears, although the language is complicated, it appears that the language in this year's budget continues or transfers even a greater amount of the cost for any new programs for the homeless to the city of New York. So can you clarify that for me?
I think that the language that's included there was a part of the projections for the state's financial plan, and I would defer to the Division of the Budget. I know that they have been working with the finance committees as well as the staff to discuss the funding mechanisms that support the executive budget, and I think that's included in that. So I would really defer to the Division of the Budget on.
So, might you agree, based on a previous question from, I think, one of my colleagues who had to leave now, that your budget appears flat for new expansion of homeless services, and yet there's a commitment to expanded homeless services, that the reason your budget is flat is because the Division of Budget has determined they can pass that cost off to the City of New York?
Well, I would say that the homeless action plan that the governor has put forward is definitely fully funded. Those funds are in a miscellaneous appropriation, so we know that there are funds that are available for this purpose. And, you know, I think that the funding streams and the sources behind the $20 billion are fully accounted for, and your staff can, again, work with the Division of the Budget to determine where all of those funding lines are located within the budget.
Okay, so I guess for the record, for whoever from Division of the Budget is watching this hearing, we would love to see some kind of chart that shows how all these programs for homeless New Yorkers and expanded both capital and supportive service and operating expenses are actually paid for in the state budget, because frankly, I can't figure it out holding up your various budgets. So I think we really need a chart that documents that, because again, I think that there is a fear that we are announcing programs and either not putting the money into them that would be needed for you to operationalize, or counting double money that we promised to others in earlier years, and treating it as if it's new money for new programs when it was already committed, or simply transferring those costs down to the local level, which we might have ideological disagreement on one way or the other, but we certainly want to know whether that's the story or not.
We'll give you some visibility into that, definitely.
Thank you very much. Assembly.
Yes, Assemblywoman Lepardo.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I just have a few questions on for a variety of topics. The first has to do with the Governor's Executive Order 151. In your testimony, you said that you were helping each county comply with that order. Can you tell me how exactly you're going about doing that? I'll tell you why I'm asking the question. I just received a few minutes ago a copy of an application my county apparently has submitted, and I was unaware that there had been monies appropriated, so I'm curious as to how much you have appropriated and how you're planning on distributing it.
Mm-hmm. So the agency has done a lot of outreach. When the executive order was enacted and released, we immediately arranged calls, a statewide conference call with all 58 districts across the state. The commissioners all participated in that call, and we took a couple of hours to go through with them and talk about the EO 151, what it meant, how they could execute it, and you know, we also provided them with additional information in order to give them a good framework for processing requests to us for technical assistance as well as funding. So they did receive EO 151 plan document. We asked every county to fill it out, whether they were applying for technical assistance or resources was something that we asked them to do in all cases, so that we would have good knowledge of what their executive order practices and policies are within their local community. So each one of the districts have been working on submitting those plans. We've received a number of them, probably 28 to 30 of them we've received from various counties across the state. And we are currently working to evaluate those initiatives, and any costs that are over and above what the county would have been spending to shelter individuals. We are committing to helping them fund that. And so, again, we're working with the counties, and there are very many counties who are doing a great job with execution of the EO 151.